As I was researching some topics about honey, I came across a term I'd never heard before, bee pollen, and I thought I'd investigate. Apparently, this is really nutritious food and it's really healthy for us. Now, normally the bees go out and collect the pollen and bring it back to the hive where it's used as a food source for growing more bees. But we've learned how to collect this material and it's available now in jars, and you can buy it in specialty stores and online. Is this bee pollen really that nutritious? Is it more nutritious than honey? Let's have a close look at all. So what is bee pollen? Well, it's a mixture of pollen from flowers, a bit of nectar, and bee spit. As the bees are going around collecting the pollen, it covers their body and they gather it up and kind of ball it up and stick all those pollen grains together with some saliva and with some nectar. They then form a ball and they put it into pockets which are located on their hind feet. And this is very visible once it becomes a large ball, because as they're flying around, you can see it on their leg. When they get back to the hive, they take this ball of pollen, put it in a honeycomb, and seal it off. And there it ferments, and they use it as a food source later on. We know honey is very nutritious, and bees make it using this pollen material. So people thought, well, maybe it's good to eat as well. So beekeepers found a way to collect it from the hives. They basically take it from the bees as they return, and then we can do a couple things with it. Beekeepers do feed the bees later on in the season. In the middle of summer, bees have trouble finding enough pollen. So beekeepers feed them some bee pollen. Other beekeepers collect it and sell it to us. So is this a nutritious food for us? Well, when we look at it, we find it has lots of proteins and fatty acids and minerals and vitamins and antioxidants. It actually has quite a range of nutrients that are good for our health. I thought I'd have a look at the actual numbers of these, and I compared them to apples and kale. And what we find is that in most cases, bee pollen has higher numbers. They have more protein, they have more fatty acids, they have more vitamins. They're really high on some minerals, although for some minerals like potassium, they're actually lower than apples and kale. But overall, the numbers are pretty good. You would think from these numbers that bee pollen should be a very nutritious food. But there is a catch. There's a problem with eating these pollen grains. They have a very tough coating, and our digestive system isn't very good at breaking down that coating. The nutrients that are found inside the pollen are only a benefit to us if we're able to digest the pollen and release these nutrients and make them bioavailable. That means our intestines can actually absorb them. So can humans digest bee pollen? Let's first have a look at what happens when bees actually collect this pollen. So they collect the pollen and they mix it with their own saliva. And that saliva contains enzymes that start breaking down the pollen. It also includes nectar. And the bees clump all of this together. When they get back to the hive, they keep working on this material. They add more saliva, they add bacteria from their mouth part, and they increase the moisture content of this pollen. They then pack it in their honeycombs and seal it with wax and honey. Now what happens to it is that fermentation starts. This is an anaerobic condition. There's no air getting into this honeycomb. That allows certain bacteria, the lab bacteria, to ferment the material. And during that fermentation process, it breaks down the coating around the pollen spore. Later on, when the bees come along and open up the honeycomb, they have a food that's ready to eat. In fact, bees can't digest the pollen unless it goes through this fermentation process. Now let's compare that process to collecting bee pollen that we eat. The bees still collect the pollen, but before they can get into the hives, we strip it off the bees and we dry it. The reason for drying it is that we want to prevent fermentation from taking place. Fermentation would spoil the product. We need to have it dry so we can put it into jars and store it for a longer period of time so it can get to your grocery shelf. The product we buy is whole pollen. That outer coating is still intact. Now we eat that, and the digestive juices in our stomach are not strong enough to break down this outer coating. This pollen never releases its nutrients. In fact, it's estimated that up to 70% of the pollen we eat simply passes through our bodies and we absorb no nutrients from it. Now, a few of the pollens will break apart and we do get some nutrients. Part of that is due to our chewing process, where we literally break the pollens apart. So even though the nutrients in pollen are quite high, they don't do us any good because we can't get to them. The bottom line is that pollen is not that nutritious for humans. What about the health claims that people are making for bee pollen? Well, there's actually a long list of these. It lowers cholesterol levels. It lowers heart disease. It has anti-inflammatory effect. It can provide extra immunity. It can block the release of histamine, the main compound responsible for allergic reaction. It can boost blood circulation in the brain. And this is really my favorite claim. The Bible and ancient Egyptian texts have documented the proof that the pollen is good for public health. That's not very good scientific proof. So what does the science say? There are lots of studies that have looked at bee pollen, and they generally conclude that it's very healthy for us. They are very cautious about the words they use. So most of these reports say something like could be healthy for us, or may provide benefits. There was a recent study that summarized a lot of these studies, and it was released in 2021, so it's a fairly recent study. And it went through all of the health benefits, and I picked one of these health benefits out and had a close look at it, and it gave 6 different other studies that were proof of this health benefit. And this had to do with heart disease. So I had to look at each one of these 6 studies. And in every case, the study either looked at rats and not humans, or they looked at extracts of pollen. They didn't use real pollen. Now, both of these are a bit of a problem. We might see some health benefits in rats and not see them in humans. Although admittedly, rats and humans are pretty close in their biology. A bigger problem is that most of these studies don't use complete pollen. They use extract. So they take the pollen, mix it up in a test tube, extract some chemical from the pollen, and then feed that to the rat. Now that's a major problem in this case because the pollen can't be digested by the rat. So they're really testing whether the nutrients inside the pollen have some effect. When we look at all of the studies, the conclusion is that there are really no clinical studies to show that bee pollen is healthy for us. Several other researchers have also looked at this information and reached the same conclusion. There's a possible health benefit, but no proof that it really exists. You can find Reality Time on YouTube, Substack, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. I'll put links to these and our social pages in the description below. If you're interested in gardening, check out my YouTube channel called Garden Fundamentals or my blog called Garden Myths. Let the truth shine into your life.